If you have seen a few of my videos, you may not be aware of this, but most of you probably are. But this is a channel that is dedicated to advanced analytics when it comes to college football. I believe advanced analytics such as success rate will tell us more than the raw statistics such as yards per game. Now, most of you have asked the following questions. What is success rate? What is SP plus? What is F plus? Like I've mentioned these before in almost every video. So this is a video that is 3 years in the making. Finally, you will have a primer that will shed some light on some of the things that I talk about when I'm doing my game previews. If this is your first time visiting the channel, do me a favor, hit the like button and subscribe if you are interested in hearing a different perspective on the sport of college football. So, what is SP plus? SP plus is a rating system developed by Bill Connelly that evaluates team performance on a per play basis. The SP plus rating comes from efficiency, which is success rate, explosiveness, and factors related to field position and finishing drives. So when you subtract the offensive SP plus and defensive SP plus and the plus minus of your special teams SP plus, that is going to give you your overall team rating. And success rate is a common term from Football Outsiders that is used to measure efficiency by determining if a play was successful or not. So what does determine a successful play? In college football, what determines a successful play is this: when you gain 50% of the yardage on first down, 70% of the yardage on second down, and you gain 100% of the yardage on third or fourth down. So here's part of the reason why I prefer using success rate, yards per play, as opposed to just using total yards per game. Now, this is a slight disclaimer. The data used in this video was pulled from the play-by-play data from collegefootballdata.com, and it was inserted in an Excel spreadsheet, and it is data from the 2019 season. So here's an example of the differences between success rate and total yards per game. Now you will notice a difference between the teams using advanced analytics as opposed to using the raw statistic. A glaring team that is listed in the top 10 in overall offensive success rate is Air Force, and based on their offensive system, that shouldn't be a surprise to you. And another team that should not have been surprising to see is LSU, holding the number 1 spot in both offensive success rate and total yards per game. So now that you have a handle of what success rate and SP plus is, let's get to the other ratings. FEI, not FPI that ESPN likes to use, but FEI. FEI is a drive-based metric developed by Brian Fremeau. It deals in an opponent-adjusted possession efficiency that is expected to take place on a neutral field against an average opponent. And F plus, which is a combination of FEI and SP plus. If you have seen this before, you have probably seen this in the tail of the tape that I like to use. So F plus is known as the college football rankings of Football Outsiders. It captures the efficiency and the explosiveness while mixing in the defensive quality and special teams effectiveness in a single number, resulting in a percentage. Now, that percentage number was from 2019 all the way back to 2007. But for this year, F plus is in a decimal form. And that number describes the overall team quality versus the average team for that particular season. And garbage time. Simply put, garbage time is when a game is considered over. And metrics such as SP plus and my advanced metrics, it filters out garbage time possessions and plays. So the criteria for garbage time is this: it is a game that is not within 38 points within the second quarter, a game not within 28 points in the third, and a game that is not within 22 points in the fourth quarter. Now, you're probably asking yourself this: is it possible for a team to get themselves out of garbage time? The answer is yes. And a prime example of this would be UCLA and Washington State from last year. Washington State had a 32-point lead in the third quarter, and at that point in time, the advanced metrics stopped tracking the plays for both squads until UCLA cut the lead to 25 points, and then it just got weird from there. And if you want proof of that, then to give a better example of how a team can get themselves in and out of garbage time quick, the link is in the description below. So not to get too technical on these terms when I'm talking about offensive and defensive SP plus, just think of offensive SP plus as a offensive scoring average. That's essentially what it is, but it is based off of advanced analytics. So it is essentially your offensive specific SP plus rating. Defensive SP plus, just think of that as the same way. Just think of it as the average points that is allowed, but it is an adjusted scoring average for your team's defensive specific SP plus rating. So the lower the number, the better for defensive SP plus, and the higher the number, the better for offensive SP plus. Now that we have talked about offensive and defensive SP plus, we have to get into the down situation. Not all downs are considered the same. Common sense would tell you that you would not call the same play on 3rd and 20 as you would on 2nd and 1. Unless you're Mike Leach, or you're probably the service academy schools, Army, Navy, Air Force. That's probably outside of the norm. But all other coaches would change their approach relative to down and distance. So this is where we have standard downs and passing downs. Passing downs is whenever you have a 2nd down with 8 or more yards to go, or a 3rd or 4th down with 5 or more yards to go. And standard downs, if that down does not meet the criteria, for example, 1st and 10, 2nd and 3, 3rd and 1, that will constitute as a standard down. And if you're on offense, you want more standard downs than you do passing downs, because if you have standard downs, you're essentially staying ahead of the chains, and passing downs would mean that you are getting behind the chains and staying off schedule. So it's easy to understand the differences between downs, right? So now that you have that understanding, let's take a look at the top 10 teams of both standard down and passing down offenses. For review, the standard downs are listed on the left and the passing downs are listed on the right. Not much of a shock here to see LSU holding down the top 2 spots when it comes to those metrics. LSU was insane from an efficiency standpoint, and it also made a really good reason as to why their offense was so darn difficult to stop last year. So it seems like you guys got the basics down. So now it's time to dive into what happens when those metrics are being adjusted based on the opponent. Now, these are the ratings I use when I'm comparing the offense versus the defense in my game previews when one team has the ball over the other. I like to wait for about 4 to 5 weeks until I get a nice solid number, more data, in order for me to try to do the opponent adjusted marks. Now, you're not going to find these ratings online. This stuff is calculated by yours truly, and it's essentially a feeble attempt to try to emulate what Bill Connelly does in his adjusted offensive ratings and adjusted defensive ratings, all the like. So not as refined as his, but I think it kind of made sense a little bit, but we'll see. But in any event, this is what the adjusted stats are. So you have adjusted offensive success rate. An adjusted offensive success rate is an output for success rate that is on offense compared to the output based on their opponents. Adjusted rush offense is an opponent adjusted output that measures the efficiency of a team's rushing offense. Adjusted pass offense, the same as rushing offense except for just a team that's passing the ball. And adjusted offensive explosiveness is an output for explosive plays on offense that is opponent adjusted. So an explosive play is 15 yards or more on a running play and 20 yards or more on a passing play. So remember when I said earlier that this is a feeble attempt at trying to emulate what Bill Connelly does when he adjusts his numbers for the opponent? This is what I mean. So here's an example of the raw success rate and when it is adjusted. So the adjusted metric is on the right, and it is a rating compared to the output of their opponents. Now you'll notice how Washington State and USC are not in the top 10 when the success rate is adjusted, and the top 5 of the raw success rate is flipped when it is adjusted. Except if your initials are LSU. Makes sense, right? And then here's a look at adjusted rushing and passing offenses. Now the adjusted rushing offense is on the left and the adjusted passing offense is on the right. So there are 4 teams from this slide that appear in the top 10 in both metrics: LSU, Oklahoma, Alabama, and Ohio State. Both LSU and Oklahoma are the only teams in the country that were ranked in the top 5 in both of those metrics. We can't forget about standard downs and passing downs as well, because that can be adjusted also. So on the left, we have the top 10 on standard downs on the right, and we have the top 10 units on passing downs. So bonus points if you can figure out why Air Force is ranked so high in standard downs and why Navy is ranked in the top 10 in passing downs. Now we see the usual suspects in LSU, Clemson, Ohio State, and Alabama in the top 10 in both those metrics, and Louisiana Lafayette The Raging Cajuns were sneaky underrated last year, and Billy Napier, he did a solid job changing that culture. Now, you can't have a discussion on advanced analytics and leave out the offensive line, because there are metrics and ratings for them as well. So for the offensive line, you have offensive sack rate, and offensive sack rate is exactly what it is. It is an offensive line metric for the percentage of sacks you allow on every single drop back. The lower percentage, the better it is. For offensive line yardage, it gives the credit to the offensive line for being able to generate a push up front. The higher the number, the better it is. So it is the average yardage the offensive line is responsible for. So for the calculation of offensive line yardage for college football is this. The O-line gets 100% of the credit for rushing yardage between 0 and 3 yards, well actually greater than 0 and 3 yards, and 50% credit for yards 4 through 8. Now anything over 8 yards is quantified as a highlight opportunity, and all the credit goes to the runner. So with the pro definition as well, since there is an offensive line yardage for the NFL, lost yardage counts for 125%, and garbage time is filtered out for all line yardage averages. Opportunity rate is the percentage of carries when 4 yards are available that gain at least 4 yards. Power success rate is the percentage of runs on 3rd or 4th down, 2 yards or less to go, that achieved a first down or a touchdown. And stuff rate is the percentage of carries by running backs that are either stopped at or behind the line of scrimmage. So on the left, you have the top 10 teams in offensive line yardage, and on the right, you have opportunity rate. So it's not a surprise to see a team like Army and Air Force, who are the two teams who run the option attack, are in the top 4. You also notice Clemson is ranked first in opportunity rate for the percentage of carries that gained at least 4 yards, and they're also second in offensive line yardage. They were an outstanding run blocking team up front in 2019. So we can't just talk about the offense without talking about the defense. So as you can see here, everything is predicated on a measurement of defensive efficiency. For defensive success rate, it is your overall defensive success rate that is adjusted based on your opponent. Defensive explosiveness is an output of explosive plays that is opponent adjusted. Explosive plays 15 yards or more on a running play, 20 yards or more on a passing play. For rush defense, pass defense, standard down defense, and passing down defense, it is a metric based on that particular statistic, but it is a measurement of that defensive efficiency per that particular metric. Now, defensive success rate does not measure out to overall defensive SP. It is one of many metrics that Bill Connelly uses to determine defensive SP plus that is on the left-hand side. The two teams who finished in the top 10 in overall defensive SP plus are Ohio State and Oregon, while San Diego State, Utah, Pitt, and Missouri finished in the top 20. On the right side, you have the top 10 teams in adjusted defensive explosiveness. Now, in case you were wondering, Baylor's adjusted defensive success rate was 52nd, but they did not give up a lot of big plays. So this is the epitome of a team that would bend on defense, but they would not break. Interesting seeing UAB and Appalachian State again, huh? Well, they were the only two teams in the country that were rated in the top 10 in adjusted rushing and passing defenses. As good as they were outside of the top 25 in adjusted defensive explosiveness. So when they played their assignment, they were efficient, but if a player got out of their gap, it would lead to a big play, potentially. Also, on the right-hand side on passing defenses, it's not a big shock to see DBU take the top mark in that particular metric. Well, there is Ohio State in the top 10 in both standard and passing down adjusted defense. It wasn't a secret how efficient they were in forcing offenses to stay behind the chains, and if they had you in an obvious passing situation, you were going to face an uphill battle. A big surprise is Buffalo, taking the number 2 spot in adjusted passing down defense. But you must understand that passing downs are not always about throwing the football. Sacks come into the play on the equation, and the Bulls were tied for 8th in the country against FBS teams in sacks. A bigger surprise for me was Oregon finishing in the top 3. Oregon is a team not known for their defense during the Chip Kelly era, but Andy Avalos as defensive coordinator has done an outstanding job in Eugene. So I'm not going to go as in depth with the defensive line stats as I did with the offensive line stats, because they are simply the polar opposite of each other. Regarding opportunity rate, power success rate, and defensive line yardage, the lower the number the better it is. And when you're dealing with stuff rate and defensive sack rate, the higher the number, the more disruptive your defense is. So as you can see, we have Ohio State ranked in the top 2 in both defensive sack rate and defensive line yardage. Defensive sack rate is on the left and defensive line yardage is on the right. So just to take a stab at this, I want to say this has something to do with Chase Young. Not a surprise to see Ohio State's strength was at the defensive line position. And also something to look at, 5 Big Ten teams ranked in the top 10 in defensive line yardage. It was very interesting to see when I pulled the data for this one. So here's an example of a game preview from last year. It is the Fiesta Bowl semifinal between Ohio State and Clemson. So when I do a game preview, I compare the offense versus the defense for both teams. I do not think it makes sense to do offense versus offense and defense versus defense. When I compare the teams based on the advanced analytics, I feel a team has an advantage when their ranking is 11 spots ahead of the other team. When both units have a ranking that is 10 spots within each other, I do not see it as an advantage. And as you see here, there were a lot of pushes when both units had the ball and very few advantages. The game played out exactly as the advanced analytics showed, and it was a tight contest. Now, I hope this video sheds some light on the advanced analytics when it comes to college football. Keep in mind, this is simply an introduction. I did not talk about expected points added, or EPA for short, havoc rate, turnover luck, post-game win expectancy, scoring rate margin, etc., etc., etc. So if you want to learn more about advanced analytics when it comes to college football, I suggest visiting Football Outsiders for one, Football Study Hall. Not sure if they're still around since Bill Connolly left, but it was a great resource to follow. I used to go to that website every single day. And collegefootballdata.com. That is a phenomenal resource of college football statistics. I hope you found this video informative, and I hope this explains the method of my madness when it comes to my weekly game previews. If you have any questions, or if there was something in the video that I did not touch on, leave me a comment below. And if you want to listen to College Football Channel that gives a unique analytical perspective, hit the subscribe button, and your support is always appreciated. Thank you for watching.